The 1920s was defined as the Roaring Twenties in the United States.
It was a time when many people defied prohibition and indulged in new styles of dancing and dressing.
It was an exuberant, free-willing, popular culture.
We're talking 20s?
Yes.
We're talking a major explosion.
Going into the 1920s, Europe was in conflict, and the United States wanted to pull away from Europe's influence.
Okay. We just came out of World War I.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think it was over 1918, I'm not sure, but that was the war of the trenches. We had dug our way across Europe, and we were ready to be free of Europe. Free of Europe in every way, especially in art.
Everything until the 20s came out of Paris and London, but now we realize that America had great artists and it was our chance to break away.
Break all ties from Paris, and we want to show you that we have major artists, and there's a lot of thinking going on here, and we're going to show you what art really looks like. Well, we certainly did. I'm not going to talk very much about European artists because it was really the 1920s in America where we set our stamp on art and literature and music.
Two art movements, Surrealism and Art Deco, had their genesis during the 1920s.
After the exposition in 1890, I think, we brought Surrealism to the United States. The Surrealist painters that exaggerated time and space, exaggerated form. We had Art Deco. The Art Deco movement was all about idealizing the female.
Who were some of the famous major artists?
Major artists?
And major artworks. Famous artworks.
All right. Major artist, Edward Hopper. He did a painting called Nighthawks. It's all about repetitive geometry and really dark shadows.
Not only did art play a major role in the 1920s, but literature also prospered, with many different themes, ideas, morals, and values.
What are some famous books in the 1920s era?
What are some famous books in the 1920s era? One of my favorites would be, well, it's based in the 1920s, The Great Gatsby. Anything by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Sherwood Anderson, he's one of my favorites from the 20s. He wrote a book called Winesburg, Ohio, and the theme is contrasting kind of agrarian country themes with more urban industrial themes, the tension between the country and the city.
There were a variety of themes that were addressed in the 1920s literature.
What are the themes? I think the themes in the 20s would have been things like, well, all of a sudden there was all that money after opulence and decadence, I think, because that was the time of Prohibition, right? Do you know what that was? Yeah. So I think the tension between the desires of the flesh and the moral conscience, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Most of the settings in literature took place where most of the popular events occurred at the time. One example being New York City, where many jazz clubs were located.
Okay, so the settings would have been the cities, because the cities were these growing places. All of a sudden New York City is starting to look like the New York City that you've probably seen. All of a sudden you could have in the 20s, the turn of the century really, Sears and Roebuck designed this idea of publishing something that could bring the store to your home. So one of the big themes, I bet, I guess I'm back to question, is also like consumerism. People had money and people had money to buy lots of things. So
the 1920s was a time in art when America broke away from Europe and created themes such as Surrealism and Art Deco. In literature, F. Scott Fitzgerald stood out as an author, and so did the recurring theme of the city life.